The purpose of this slide is to go over how to do writing workshop. More specifically, how I do writing workshop. There's different variations, and it's definitely going to depend on whether or not you are doing writing workshop in an elementary school setting versus a middle school setting versus a high school setting. Also, the level of students in your class might kind of take play in how you run your writing workshop. If you have learners who are at a lower level versus an honors class, there might be some differentiation there. But this is kind of my model, and it really, really works well for me, so maybe you can also try it in your classroom with some adaptations if necessary. Step 1. I set loose parameters. To just go in every single day and be like, okay, we're writing today, that's a little impractical maybe. So I like to start using writing parameters to kind of get them off the ground with at least like some focus. I use the writing purposes from Kelly Gallagher's Write Like This book. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend you check it out if you already don't have it or know of it. But basically, Gallagher goes through a number of different purposes for why we write, and most of them are real-world application purposes. So I'll start with one of those. The first one being reflect and express. So we'll talk more about narrative style writing, reflective writing, memoir writing. They still get to use first person. It's a little less formal. It's a really good starting point. Then we'll move on to inform and explain. Okay, our purpose is to inform and explain, so maybe they could dabble with some research, or they could write about something that they're an expert on and teach me as the teacher or their classmates something through their writing. Then we'll move on to evaluate and judge, where they're writing reviews. They can review books, review movies, review restaurants, kind of whatever they want. What's another one they really like? Take a stand, propose a solution. This gives students an opportunity to argue, so they love it, especially high school students. They get to kind of write about something that is bothering them or something that they're angry about and try to make change. And, that's definitely something that 16-year-olds want to do, is to change everything, because they're always unhappy about whatever the school's asking of them. So that's a fun one for them. Then you have your more scholastic, academic type ones. For example, analyze and interpret. We use this purpose specifically with a book, either their independent reading book or a whole class novel, while they're writing a more formal literary analysis. But regardless, step 1 is setting a parameter, picking a purpose that they could be focusing on in that writing period. Step 2, encourage individual brainstorming. When I introduce a new purpose, I have students take some time, this could be 5 minutes, this could be 15 minutes, to just on a sheet of notebook paper, write down anything that comes to mind in terms of an idea of where they want to go with the purpose. What do they want to write about? Sometimes this brainstorming looks like scribbles, sometimes it looks like organized bullet points of ideas, sometimes it's a couple sentences, sometimes it's a paragraph. It's kind of just whatever comes out. I leave it very loose for them. After they brainstorm independently, we'll do kind of a think, pair, share, and they'll collaboratively brainstorm. This looks like first just talking to someone around them about what they scribbled or wrote on their individual brainstorm paper. And then we'll open it up to the whole class. And typically I will be at the front of the room with the whiteboard and a marker, just kind of listening to what's ever being thrown out from the students and jotting some things down. And then this way, if a student was sitting there kind of stuck, they didn't really have a great independent brainstorm, now there's this like plethora of ideas spread out across the board, which I'll leave up for a while, that they could maybe kind of look at and borrow an idea from, or maybe something they see up there will kind of trigger an idea to come to them, and that way they have kind of a starting point for where they want to go with their writing piece. What's next? Collaboratively brainstorm, we talked about that. Pre-writing. Pre-writing, you can do it or you can skip it. It kind of depends on the purpose. If it's something informal, I typically won't have them do any pre-writing. But if it's something more formal or more scholastic, like a literary analysis, I'll give them a graphic organizer with boxes for a thesis statement and 3 main points and quotes and things like that. If they're doing inform and explain or inquire and explore, where there's outside research involved, I'll give them a graphic organizer that helps them organize what they've learned through research and where they got things from, like their sources and things like that. So the pre-writing happens if it needs to, but it doesn't always have to happen. Next is teacher modeling. This is where you come in and you are writing the assignments right there with the students. So as a teacher, actually, I feel like my writing has improved so much over the past 5 years because of the fact that I'm always writing alongside with my students with Writing Workshop. So that's a benefit for me, I suppose. But with the teacher modeling, it's going to either look like on-the-spot modeling, which we'll talk about in one of the other PD presentations, or it's going to look like modeling ahead of time and sharing that with students. But we'll kind of cover both of those in more depth later on. The longest part of the process is going to be students drafting. Students, after they see your model, are going to grab a laptop and start their own. The drafting process, if you are allowing 10 days for a certain writing assignment, then that might be 7 to 8 of the 10 days. It's just the drafting process. Some kids are going to need longer than others. Some of them just are ready to go. They hit the keyboard and everything's just flowing. But other students are really going to struggle with the drafting. So this is when you, on those writing days, want to pinpoint who needs kind of some more individualized attention to get started. Who do you need to get a sentence starter for? Who do you need to kind of jog some ideas with? And that's going to change maybe purpose to purpose. Some kids might have an easier time writing reflectively than researching, and vice versa. But you really want to make sure that you're getting students from the beginning going so they're not just kind of staring at a blank screen during 7 days of drafting time. The next part is the peer revision and editing part. This is the collaboration. This is an opportunity for students to share their work with either a partner or a small group in the class. When students are doing this, they are reading their work out loud sometimes, or other times they're sharing their work with another student who reads it on their own and then maybe gives some comments or feedback. The best way to get productive peer editing and peer revision is by setting them up with some kind of peer revision checklist. Or what I like to do is actually print the rubric that I'm going to be using to grade the assignment and giving that to all of the editors, so then that way they could use that rubric to assess their partner's writing. And the rubric is really focused on the 6 core writing traits. Actually, there's 7 if you count presentation. But we'll talk about those in our last PD slides, okay? So what's next in the whole process? Reworking the draft. After students revise and collaborate with a peer, they go back independently to their original draft. They take the feedback that they've gotten from their peers, suggestions, comments, and they finalize their draft and they make it polished and they make it the best that it could be before publishing, which is the final part. The way I have my students publish is through Google Classroom. They publish electronically. We are kind of paperless in that sense. But for publishing in another classroom, it might look like printing and turning it in, or it might look like adding it to a binder/writing portfolio. So that could kind of differentiate based on the teacher's preference.